As the civil war within the Republican Party rages on, the possibility of a Trump 2024 presidential run is, of course, still very real. However, political strategist for Trump's 2016 campaign, Steve Bannon, believes that Trump should first run for Congress in 2022 and then replace Pelosi as House Speaker so he can, quote, impeach Joe Biden for his illegitimate activities of stealing the election, Sagar.
Wow. So, host of Smart Folks with Don Calloway, CEO of Pine Strategies and Democratic strategist Don Calloway, join us now, as well as co-host of the Realignment podcast, our friend Marshall Kossoff. They're here to discuss. Marshall, let me start with you. What exactly do you think this is? Is this just Bannon talking? Is this actually a realistic thing? I mean, John Quincy Adams famously was elected to the House of Representatives after he was president, which actually is set up an interesting thing about what exactly to call him. Or is this just, is Bannon mouthing off, or does Trump actually want to hold office again?
Yeah, I mean, first thing, I have a hard time understanding how he could get elected speaker. Let's just say he actually ran and this actually happened. There's a huge, not majority, but a decent Liz Cheney wing of the Republican Party in the House that would never vote for Trump to be speaker. And when you combine their votes with the Democrats, this literally wouldn't happen. So we should just start with the idea that this is Steve Bannon doing what Steve Bannon does, which is saying things that aren't that smart, but in a very smart and compelling way. So that would never even happen in the first place. So given the fact that he couldn't actually become speaker, I don't know why Trump would want to actually do this. And I don't think this would actually fit Trump's interests or the Trump things that Trump is trying to do. If he wants to play kingmaker, he could do that from Mar-a-Lago and doesn't have to actually run for the House, doesn't have to actually be a backbencher, and doesn't have to be engaged in policy, which was never his interest area.
Yeah, I love the way you put that Steve Bannon's specialty is basically saying stupid things in a smart way. I like that.
Discovered that.
Don, what do you think about all of this? Do you think it's realistic? Do you think that Trump's actually considering this move? What do you think?
I have no idea what Trump is considering, and that makes me feel really good. That means I haven't been keeping up with him for the last month, and that is just a refreshing place to be. But, when do y'all let him go? I shouldn't say y'all, because I know nobody on this set is a Trump follower. But when do Republicans let him go and move on? And newsflash, you can keep all the heinous and sadistic and Trumpian ideas without actually kowtowing to and worshiping him. I actually disagree with Marshall, though. I think that even the 10-15 House Republicans who rejected him on the impeachment vote, if it came down to voting for him for Speaker or Nancy Pelosi, that's a much different decision than whether or not we retain him, whether or not we impeach him as president. So I think that if it came down to Trump as Speaker or a Democrat as Speaker, you wouldn't see that kind of bipartisan vote. A lot of folks say in the House of Representatives, even on the state level, that there's only one important vote you take, and that's the first vote you take to decide who is going to lead the chamber. Everything after that, you can kind of do your own thing. And I think you'd see significant unity among Republicans if it came down to Trump or Nancy Pelosi or any other Democrat. That's
so fascinating. Don, actually, just to answer your first question, the reason you can't move on is because Trump won't let you. So, Marshall, could you speak, to that dynamic? He blasted Mitch McConnell, who even voted to acquit him just for, saying that he was responsible for what happened during the Capitol riots. Just saw the news break this morning that Steve Scalise, the number 2 House Republican, had to make his trek down there after Kevin McCarthy did. I think pilgrimages to Mar-a-Lago are going to be a standard thing for the Republican Party for as long as Trump is alive, and I think he loves it having it that way. So it's not that it's not that people don't want to move past Trump. It's that Trump himself will not allow that to happen.
Yeah, the key thing here is your explanation of the Mar-a-Lago dynamic is key to how this is going to play out, because what Trump could do from Mar-a-Lago is he could wield all of the power without any of the attendant responsibility. So if he were actually speaker, if he were actually in the House, if he were actually in a position of direct responsibility from a political perspective, the scandals would instantly restart. He would instantly have problems. Right now, the situation, the status quo is actually pretty good for him, where he could still continually wield that power. And given that dynamic, he could still effectively lead the party much more effectively than Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell could. And the other broad thing is, I just want to pick up your point, Sagar, about the nature of the Republican Party. The reason why the party just can't move on is, as we saw in the polls earlier this week, most of the party would still want him to run again in 2024. And when you have other sets of politicians that just lack the same legitimacy, trust, or actual resonance, not only with the base, in the stereotypical Trump MAGA sense, but just with normal Republicans.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any normal Republicans who are excited about Nikki Haley, who are excited about Paul Ryan, who are excited about Kevin McCarthy. So given that reality, there's just the situation where even if you wanted to move past him, which a lot of Republicans secretly wish to, obviously, they wouldn't have a choice.
Yeah, I think.
Well,
Wait, I think that's really quickly, just a brief response. I think that's kind of a misstatement of the nature of Republican electoral politics. The old adage goes, and that's not a diss to you, Marshall, just a quick disagreement. Democrats fall in love. We pursue the personalities. Republicans fall in line. I don't know that anybody's excited about John McCain in 2008 or Mitt Romney in 2012. I don't remember some Romney mania and this cult of personality around him. He was the guy, right? And so when Republicans coalesce around a nominee, they tend to fall in line in a very kind of Stepford-Wiveian way. And I kind of admire the discipline about that, whereas Democrats tend to be caught up in this cult of personality around our politicians.
I remember when Romney was running, they had on his website these like Mitt Romney superfan T-shirts that a lot of people were, those were amazing. That people were buying, ironically. I mean, the other piece of this, Don, that I wanted to get to you on is it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't for the individual Republican politicians. Because I saw some numbers yesterday from Quinnipiac on Liz Cheney, who obviously like Republicans can't stand now and Democrats like her more than Republicans do, but also Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been, all in with Trump and Trump's been bolstering her and all of that stuff. She's actually net underwater with Republicans too. So it's not like people are loving her, even though, yes, she's doing better than Liz Cheney. But I'm just not sure that tying yourself to Trump, that his popularity with the Republican Party ultimately translates to others.
It's a very difficult conundrum, and I don't know enough about the insides of Republican politics back in these deeply red, substantially gerrymandered districts to know what the right play is. If I were a House Republican, like the woman who neighbors my congressional district back home, Ann Wagner, I would just kind of keep my head down. I would be excited about the return of earmarks in the United States Senate because I'd be trying to bring home money. I'd be trying to I don't know what I would be trying to do if I was a Republican, but I do know that I would not be weighing into the fray because it seems like taking the moral high ground a la Liz Cheney could get you really on the outs with not only party leadership, but with the Freedom Caucus and a substantial amount of these deeply red districts. And that kind of limits your career, particularly if you're looking for statewide office. But also being one of the crazies singles you out for the ire of the national media, as well as just kind of, makes you look really crazy, which is perhaps what you are. I wish I could find a more profound way to say that. But I think that, this is a time for House Republicans, particularly in the rank and file, to put their heads down and go about the work of common sense legislating. God forbid we would all just focus on that for a minute.
What's your response to that, Marshall, to that dynamic of the Marjorie Taylor Greene polling?
Yeah, I think I just want to say a quick response to our friendly disagreement here, which is the line about Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love. Basically, the situation is reversed in between both parties. I mean, look what happened in the 2020 primary. Democrats didn't fall in love with Joe Biden, but effectively, politicians, the actual interest groups that comprise the Democratic Party, they actually did fall in line there. It's not an accusation. It's just a reality about the dynamic. And then what's also true is that Republicans, a lot of them, fell in love or fell into hate with Donald Trump. So the key thing is that I think that dynamic applied in 2008, in 2012, but this is the key factor about American politics, which Trump has changed. In 2016, that dynamic completely reversed itself, and I think it's likely to continue that way for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Biden actually has a 98% approval rating in the Democratic Party, higher than anybody else. So there we go. All right, guys, stick with us. We're going to have more with Team Rising right after this.